Hello and welcome to Top Voice Tuesday. It is November 4th, and I'm excited to have with us Joe Strangel to talk about really what I think is one of the most contemporary and relevant conversations that we can be having right now, which is the manufacturing conundrum. What are we doing about the reshoring push, and what role do people play in the conversation about returning manufacturing to America? I'm going to give Joe a chance to tell his story and talk more about that here in in just a moment. As is normal, for those of you that are on the live stream right now, please do leave us a note in the chat. Let us know where you're dialing in from, where you're watching from. Leave a question or a comment. We love to get to those. And please do stay tuned through the end to make sure you hear about our newsletter and all the things that we want to have you subscribe to as we go on. If you're listening to your favorite podcast here in the conversation, so Joe, let's jump in. We start with a question that's pretty standard. First of all, tell us who you are, tell us what you do, and how did you get to the top of the Top Voice Mountain?
All righty. Thank you for allowing me to be here today. So my main role is a university professor at Mary Baldwin University in Stanton, Virginia. And I jokingly tell people I had a midlife crisis and left 30 years of manufacturing experience in order to make that transition. Really wasn't a crisis, but I did find a much better way to make a living at this point. So I like that. And I was primary plant manager, supplying automotive components to the big three, Ford, GM, and Chrysler. And while academia has its own challenges, I do sleep a lot better at night. But um, and I spend a fair amount of time on thought leadership. I entered this at the latter years of my career, and I started thinking about what do I want to do, when I officially retire from the teaching. And I decided I wanted to keep my mind sharp and continue to do something. Consulting work seemed like a natural fit. And so I'm trying to use my manufacturing expertise to help organizations become more high impact, more successful. And in part of that, I wrote a book called Humanist Manufacturing, a humanitarian approach to excellence and high impact plant operations. And while it does have manufacturing in the title, it's very relevant to any organization that wants to take a human oriented approach to integrating growth, dignity, and self actualization for all stakeholders. So,
Hmm.
um, as I doing this, I called that my two-thirds life crisis. And so I ended up taking a course from a woman named Dory Clark on recognized expert. And so the belief is that the more you do to become recognized, customers chase you instead of you chasing them, sort of thing. And one of the objectives is this thought leadership that I'm talked about. So, in the first week of January of 2020, I wrote my first blog post, and I've never missed a week in almost 6 years now. I've done it while on a cruise. I've done it while vacationing in Europe and many much less exciting places. But I really think that's one of the ways that I reach this summit of top voice recognition is just consistent thought leadership, week after week. And, to say that I wasn't very good at it early on is was confirmed by an person that said I needed an editor because I had great things to say, but my writing was a little bit off. So I thought, okay, well, I will do that. Um, as we talked earlier, I don't know exactly why I became a top voice, but I'm pleased that I am, and I think it is just consistent, good content. So.
Wow, what a story! And I would say, Joe, that if the result of your midlife or two-thirds life crises are giving back in education or starting to share your knowledge, those are pretty good outcomes for people going through a crisis. So that's a
Yeah.
pretty altruistic way to shift your life. And to your story about LinkedIn, what a great story about the power of consistency. I'm sort of smiling a little bit to your point about doing this on vacation. I started this show at the beginning of 2025. We're almost at the end. I've done it every week except for 3 weeks ago. Well, I've done it every week almost on Tuesday. I didn't do it 3 weeks ago when my wife had twins on a Monday. I thought I could pull it off. And she was like, there's no way you're doing this. So we shifted to Friday. I think it's such a great reminder of, one, the power of consistency and
Yeah,
repetition, and to your point about not being very good at it, I think a lot of people wait to be good at something before they start, and they don't realize that they have to start something in order to be good at it.
yeah.
And what a great reminder of just getting started and just getting going. So, well, let's dive in now to the topic, because I think your background in particular is really well suited for this moment. As certainly we see in the world of the broader global economy and in politics in America, the tariff wars and all of these things that we're having, behind it, there's this conversation about the attempt to make the incentives or the costs of such that manufacturing returns home here to the US. So you've spent a lot of time in that world. You spent a lot of time advising companies in this world now. Let's just start with the biggest challenge facing US manufacturing right now.
So the most significant problem they're experiencing is talent acquisition. The Manufacturing Institute and Deloitte partnered and surveyed about 200 different companies. And over 65% of them reported that they have a hard time recruiting and retaining workers as their top business challenge. And I've experienced the same thing when I was out interviewing 11 different local manufacturers who expressed exactly the same. And according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which obviously these aren't really current data because we have this little thing called a shutdown going on, but there was nearly a 500,000 manufacturing jobs open right now,
Wow.
and the National Association of Manufacturers projects a 3.8 million employment gap in between now and 2033. And these numbers came out before the recent push to reshore more businesses or more manufacturing. So I think those numbers are only going to go up unless we start to do something significant to convince our younger generations to join this particular industry.
Yeah. So there that obviously is a big gap between, I think, what is the traditional narrative. Clearly, many manufacturing jobs moved overseas. It's been several decades since
Right.
that push happened, but there are still jobs like that here. So, what's I don't want to get into too many. We don't get into a lot of politics on the show, but let's just talk about why is there maybe a misperception between the number of jobs that are open and what people believe are actually available? Because that's a big number, almost 4 million jobs. That's a lot.
Yeah. Well, that's not right now the gap, but it's
Right.
what they consider will grow over time.
Right.
Um, frankly, I don't know. I think part of it is people don't search manufacturing jobs. They're more focused on technology or finance or those sorts of professions. Everybody wants to be a thought leader, right? They want to be an influencer. So and manufacturing just has a terrible, perception that it's dirty, grimy, nasty. And yeah, that was the past. It's still some companies today, but especially as AI starts to become more of an influence, plants are more like a hospital environment than they were, a grimy manufacturing spot in the past. So, I really encourage people to kind of take a moment and look at it and say, "Oh, okay, maybe this is something I should consider."
So you're getting into this discussion about employee experience. What is a manufacturing job like? And I know that there's a lot of issues maybe operationally around costs and bringing jobs back, but let's just talk about the employee experience. What's different about today's manufacturing job than 30 years ago? Is that stereotype part of what's holding people back? I think you're referencing some of that, but
Yeah.
we've seen Amazon bring a ton of jobs to the US. We've seen some of the large auto manufacturers build the big plants in the Southeast. So what's different about the modern manufacturing employee experience?
So for the most part, it's so much more technologically advanced than it used to be in the past. And one of the issues that you have when you have an employment gap is you got to figure out ways to solve that, right? And so people are starting to bring more robots into manufacturing, and or cobots. A cobot is something where it assists the individual as they're doing their work. And if years and years ago, GM, wanted to go to a completely automated operation, and they bought all these robots, they put them in the plants, but they failed to recognize that they didn't have enough people that could actually keep those robots up and running when they had problems. And so, um, but it's such a different environment today than it ever has been. The fact that the product that you're producing is so much more sophisticated, right? I recently bought a new vehicle, and oh my goodness, all the gadgets on it. Just simple thing like if I'm on a hill waiting at a stoplight, it'll hold the brake for 2 seconds while I move my foot from the brake to the gas, for
Yeah.
example, right? And so, the engineering level of sophistication is so much farther advanced, and and people have to understand that manufacturing isn't just people on a manufacturing line loading and unloading parts all day. There are quality people, there are engineers, there are, finance people, there every HR. So, there's so many different opportunities in a manufacturing environment that people just, and historically it's paid really well. I've got a doctorate. I've got 4 degrees paid for by manufacturing, employers over the years, and, um, you know, I even I even advocate that, you know, if you can't afford to go to college for whatever reason, go find a manufacturing company that has tuition reimbursement, for example. You'll get in there, you'll find out, this really is actually a pretty good career. So maybe I ought to stick with this. And so there's just I'm always disappointed that more people don't understand the value. There's another study where 7 out of 10 people, if they have manufacturing experience, will encourage their children or others, younger individuals, to look at manufacturing. But the numbers are only 3 out of 10 if they have no background with that particular industry. So
Mm.
a lot of it's just they just don't know. When I grew up in Michigan, we had a "Say Yes to Michigan" campaign for tourism, and I'm always advocating that we need a "Say Yes to Manufacturing" campaign
Yeah.
at the national level or local levels, to say, "Hey, this is really good opportunity. Give it a
Yeah.
chance."
So you used a word in there, cobots. I'd never heard that phrase, that word
Yeah.
before. I really love that. I know we've talked about it. Yeah, I'm going to use that one from now. So let's talk about the gap then in perception and reality, and people just don't know about it, and what companies are doing to try to improve the perception and the campaign. So are companies trying to fill, what are they doing that's innovative, that's creative, that's around communication, getting the word out? How are companies trying to adjust to fill that gap?
Unfortunately, a lot of the companies I've dealt with aren't doing anything any differently. So that's been part of my frustration, and I think just companies in general fail to realize that our younger generations want more out of their job than a paycheck.
Mm,
They want to work for a company that has a compelling purpose. And if the purpose is only to make the owner, more wealthy, they're not into that. And so they want to know that what they're doing has a benefit to society, whether it's environmentally or socially, that it's improving the environment in some way, or it's helping to lift up people in need, for example. And if if you don't have that, you're going to have a hard time getting anyone to come to work for your company that's in these their 20s and 30s, for example. And a lot of what we're facing right now is a lot of people are in their 60s and getting close to retiring, and that's part of why that employment gap is going to occur. Is that the people that have been in this industry are leaving it. So I also advocate, companies should be looking at alternatives. So, for example, I focus a lot on people that are either maybe autistic or disabled
mm,
or other different um, issues such as that, where somebody that, depending on where they are on the autistic spectrum, auti- uh, they some of them want to do highly repetitive jobs. They want to just do it over and over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And 85% of people that are autistic can't find meaningful employment. And yeah, there's some challenges, but it's not challenges that can't be worked through. And if you can get them there and get them engaged in doing that job, they're not going to leave because they don't have any choice. They don't have a lot of other options, but they're also going to be incredibly talented people. Also look at, you know, a lot of what we focus on in society is we help the people in the most dire need, but then they get to a level where they just can't quite get to, break free of that assistance and then have a meaningful job. And so I think more and more companies should be focusing on what can I do to help with that transition. So there are companies that will advance a loan, for example. So maybe somebody has a car issue that they can't get to work, so they'll advance them $500 to be able to get that fixed. Or
Mm.
maybe they have a documentation issue, and so they will help to pay some legal fees or something to bring them in and make them so that they have no issues with that regard. And so, we just and the traditional thought process is you have to have somebody that comes in and works from 7 to 3 every day, day after day.
Yeah.
Well, what if you split that job in half and 2 people that have to care for their kids during the day? One can be there in the morning, but they can't be there in the afternoon, and then you have somebody on the flip side of that. Um, and again, we talked before we came on that, you have quite the range. You have 2 weeks old to 18-year-old, right?
Yeah.
Well, one of you could have been in a manufacturing job where you were able to work that afternoon shift every day for 18 years or whatever. So we just need to be much more, you know, innovative about how we
Yeah.
approach these things if we want to fill all these gaps.
Yeah. So it leads me to maybe a hypothesis, given that you said many of the folks leaving the workforce now in their maybe later 50s, early 60s, how much of the leadership of the manufacturing ecosystem is this a leadership problem? Are we having leaders that just don't, they're playing by the old rules and they're not able to shift into today's kind of modern employment experience?
Yeah, I see a lot of that. When I wrote the book, I looked at several different what I call manufacturing exemplars, but they could be from any particular industry. But one of them was Bob Chapman, and he was suddenly thrust into leading the family business. They produce all sorts of machines that to build cardboard boxes or basically anything that you need a machine to do processing. They build those kinds of pieces of equipment. And he was he he was they bought a recent acquisition, and he went into the company. They didn't know who he was, and he was standing in the break room, and it was during the NCAA championships in basketball. And everybody in there, the room was just buzzing with everybody chatting about the games and how much fun it was watching them and who was going to win what. And he said that the bell went off to start the shift, and immediately it completely deflated everybody in that place.
Mm,
And they went off and started going through the drudgery of doing their job. And he asked himself, "Why can't work be fun?" And he he thought about himself and what he had learned as he was, doing his MBA program, for example. And it wasn't about using humans to do meaningful work. It was about how do I use them to improve my bottom line? How do I
yeah.
increase my profitability and my productivity and so on and so forth? And so the more that he thought about it, he said, "Yeah, we got to do something different here."
Mm,
And so he created a concept where he treats everybody like family. And a great example of it is when they had an economic downturn, instead of laying off the bottom 10% of the workforce, he said, "No, family wouldn't do that. You wouldn't abandon your 2-week-old twins, right? Because oh wow, the
right.
economy, inflation's rough, so we can't afford to feed all of you now, so we got to cut a couple of you from the family." And so they went in and they reduced everybody's salary by 10%. Everybody was okay with that because they had that sense of, these people care about us, they're doing the right thing. And it was so much better because then as the economy turned around, everybody was able to do more work. They were still committed. They had, they had people that were already trained and so on and so forth in the workforce. So that was one of them. But I love Yvon Chouinard is, the founder and former CEO of Patagonia. And he said, I don't know how this works, but every time I've done something to benefit the environment, I've made money. And it's like,
Yeah.
okay, and there's growing evidence that people that run organizations that are socially and environmentally responsible actually are more profitable. And what I found in my own research, but also what I find in research of others, is that the key is those companies attract and retain great people. And Richard Branson of the Virgin Companies, for example, you know, he doesn't believe the customer is number one. He believes that the employees are number one
Yeah.
because his thought process is if you take great care of the employees, everything else takes care of itself.
Yeah.
And I know that from my own experience. The last plant manager job, I went in and at the end of every shift, I would try to find something positive to write. At the end of the manufacturing line, you have a whiteboard with things like quality and numbers, defects. You have productivity numbers. Did you make a production rate that day? How much downtime did you have?
Yeah.
And it was hard at first because when I came there, that plant was really struggling. But whatever little bit of something I could find, I'd write on that board. And it was amazing. In 6 months, that plant was rocking and rolling, man. I had people coming into my office grinning from ear to ear. We made rate today. We never made rate in the history of this line. It's like,
Yeah.
wow. And it wasn't, I didn't do much else. I mean, it was just treating people well and thanking them for the work they were doing, appreciating them. And but there were other things like I had a young lady that wanted to be a registered nurse. And so she asked, can I be on a line where I don't have a lot of overtime? Can I be where I know that I can have a consistent schedule because I need to be able to get off to do my clinical time and so on and so forth? Sure. I'll do whatever I can to help you out. And people would go, well, what are you doing? You're trying to help her leave you. Why? Well, she was a great employee until she
Yeah.
left. And the other employees saw that, oh, well, he did that for her. I would hope he would do it for me as well. And I would. Every time we had somebody, I would try to figure out what is it that makes you tick? What is it you want to accomplish? And and okay, let's put a plan in place. Maybe you want to get promoted. Maybe you do want to do something outside of our organization. But while you're here, let's see what we can do to make your life the best possible waking hours of the day that we
Yeah.
spend most of them working, right? So,
One of the thing my experience suggests is that good people, they have opportunities to leave, so
yep,
you're never gonna prevent them from having opportunities, and if they wanna leave, they're gonna leave anyway, so you might as
yeah,
well build a relationship with that person
exactly.
who they might come back, they might have innovative ideas when they do come back, so you never quite know what that revolving door is gonna look like. One of the things I'm taking away from your stories, Joe, which is really interesting, is I guess it's really just a reminder that good old fashioned leadership never goes out of style. Caring
Yeah,
for people, being attentive, understanding what makes people motivate and move, and what gives them purpose, how to build a team, the value of shared struggle. All of these things are central to our human experience, and
yeah,
and it sounds like the manufacturing world is maybe slow to catch up to some of this, maybe shift away from just a productivity mindset. So I want to ask maybe one last question about that, because I think we've always followed the manufacturing world as a bit of an economic indicator from the industrial revolution onward. There's been these inflection points, and now we have AI. And it's been the hypothesis, and certainly the early data shows that AI is removing some things, it's creating some things, it's changing a lot. What role is AI now playing in the manufacturing experience? And is there an opportunity to is it just taking jobs away? Is it creating something new? Is there an opportunity to leverage it differently?
yeah. So one of the things that I encourage is people need to look at AI and a human AI augmentation.
Yeah.
they need to utilize it in a way that helps to benefit the work that the employees are doing. And what it should do is remove all the mundane aspects of the job and allow your workforce to be more creative, more innovative, more, problem solving oriented. And so there are places where AI can, it can remove a lot of back office drudgery, for example. And yeah, it could potentially eliminate some employees. But while it's not specifically manufacturing related, um, Salesforce recently had an article that they figured out a way to eliminate half their people, but they didn't get rid of them. Salesforce had a problem with keeping up with customer demand. So they redeployed these people. They took them from, a clerical job and they taught them to do sales work, for example, or other types. So they they upskilled them, they utilized them in a way that helped them to leverage their organization. And I think that's a classic example of what other companies need to do. So part of my background is lean manufacturing. And we would do something called a Kaizen event. And basically, that's bringing a bunch of cross sector people together to figure out what are the issues on the production line? What can we do to enhance productivity? And let's say there are 10 people operating on that line. Well, if when I get done, I figure out a way to eliminate 2 of them and I throw them out the door, well, what do you think is gonna happen the next time I try to implement something? "Well, sorry, I'm not gonna do this."
Right.
And I think people need to understand that with AI. It should not be the motivation to eliminate people. Now, okay, let's do it to, fill gaps. Let's do it to, employment gaps, for example, and so on and so forth. But the people that are here that have been committed to our organization, we're going to continue to stay committed to you. We're not going to use this to eliminate your particular position. Now, if somebody, if a company goes through hardship and whatever, people understand. But again, I go back to that example of Chapman that said, no, we're not laying, 10% people off. We're all going to absorb this hit.
Yeah.
And so to me, that's where AI has to come in and be utilized in any particular sector as a tool to make the work experience better, more productive, more enjoyable, help them to become more engaged. We have a huge issue with the level of employee engagement in the US. It's just in the tank. It's terrible. And again, go back to what what you mentioned earlier about just good, strong leadership. You got to understand what employees need, what they value, what motivates them, what excites them, what compels them to come in each day.
Yeah. We could go. I think we could talk about this forever. We're coming to the end of our 30 minutes, and I want to try to synthesize this conversation before we get to your bonus question, which again always kinds of always lines up nicely. So, Joe, we've talked about a lot of stuff. We've talked about leadership. We've talked about AI. We've talked about the stereotypes of manufacturing. We've talked about job gaps and the growing job gap and retiring uh, the retiring workforce and what that's leading to. What are for those people in the manufacturing world or thinking about the manufacturing world, what's one or two pieces of advice that you would give to them about why this industry, why this career matters and why there's opportunity in it?
So employees crave to work for a company that prioritizes proper care. And Tim Lebrecht calls the heart of business people. And he argues that organizations need radical humanism. And as machines take over business processes and so forth, what still remains as an element of the beautiful work that he suggests is that it has to be a human centered company that will inspire us in unexpected and caring ways. And
Mm,
the more companies can understand that this is so essential to what has to happen in order to be a thriving organization, the better off they're going to be.
I love it. I love it. And I think it's just a great reminder that people still matter. We talk about that on this show a lot, and people will always matter. And there's an opportunity in this industry and in this sector to do great things if we have leaders who think about it the right way. And that's just a great reminder. I want to get to your bonus question, Joe, and it's a nice, I think, self-reflection for you and where you're at. You started your introduction 30 years in manufacturing, moving into teaching, now doing some consulting. what role does generative AI play in your business? And as you think about 2026, how are you using it to advance? I guess this is your 75% midlife crisis or
I
something,
yeah,
whatever the next
and
turn is.
well, I'm a big fan of Grammarly, so, when I talked about, needing an editor early on, I started using Grammarly, and that the sophistication of that is just growing phenomenally. I just it's blows my mind. And I had the editor I had was, all but dissertation in English, and eventually, she said, "You don't need me anymore." So, that's one way I use AI. I do a lot of my thought leadership as I'm writing an article, for my newsletter, or just thinking about something in general. A question will pop up in my mind, and I'll go, "Oh, well, let's go on to Google Gemini or Perplexity or ChatGPT and, see what they say."
Yeah.
And it's been really, really helpful in that regard as well. But, in manufacturing, there's so many different ways that artificial intelligence is gonna be able to take, large data sets, for example, see what the trends are, to be able to be predictive, in, maintenance, needs and so on and so forth. So, you know, uh, every there's probably thousands of ways manufacturing can use AI now, and it's growing, ex exponentially every day. It's just crazy how advanced it's going.
Yeah. It's a great time to be alive. There's a lot of things
Yeah.
happening, and it's really, really an exploration for all of us. Joe, where can, in addition to LinkedIn, you mentioned your book, where else can we find you? Social media, websites, let everyone know where we can follow you more.
Yeah, so the primary location, is LinkedIn for my thought leadership. I do also have a website, emmanuelstrategicsustainability.com, that talks a lot about my humanist manufacturing approach. And, there you can also gain access to the book. But what I will offer is, if anyone who wants to reach out to me that's been on here, I'm more than happy to send an e-copy of the book to them, um, just, just as a thank you for joining us today and listening.
I appreciate that, Joe. And we'll put those links in the show notes on YouTube and on all of our podcast platforms. We'll make sure that people can get access to you there. I just want to thank you again, Joe. I think I was so excited for this episode because you represent an industry that I think is certainly, maybe the famous Mark Twain quote that the word word of my demise is greatly exaggerated. I can't remember
Yeah.
exactly how it went, but this idea that the manufacturing sector is alive and well and growing and represents great opportunity. I think you're such a reflection of that and doing important work to help sustain the economy going forward. So thank you for coming on. Thank you for doing the work that you do. Thank you all for listening today. For those of you on the live stream, for those of you that are following in your favorite podcast, please do subscribe. We're getting close to the end of the year. We've got some new things coming for 2026 that we'll be announcing soon. Top Voice Tuesday will continue with a few extra wrinkles and new additions. So, thank you again, Joe. Thank you for coming on the show. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in today. We'll see you next week.
Thank you, Michael.